Thanks everyone for joining us for our next Ripple Ventures Tech Talk with Anil Achyuta to discuss investing in frontier tech at a corporate venture fund. Anil, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
So a little bit of a background on Anil. Anil is an investment director at TDK Ventures, where he's been for about a year. TDK Ventures is the venture arm of TDK Corporate, a Japanese multinational electronics company investing in globally in early stage startups focused on health and wellness, mobility, and Industry 4.0 like robotics and IoT devices. Before that, he was the head of external innovation for over 3 years at L'Oreal, running their venture arm. And before that, he was a business development lead and senior R&D scientist in biomedical engineering at Draper Laboratories for over 5 years. On the personal side, he has an MBA from the University of Florida, and he has a PhD in chemical biomedical engineering from Northeastern University. Let's kick things off, Anil, with the discussion on your research and development journey. Can you tell us about your journey starting on the R&D and strategy side of these global research organizations like Draper, J&J, and L'Oreal, and the lessons you learned along the way related to developing products?
Sure. I guess I was a little bit of a confused scientist. Let's put it this way. I started off really looking at interfaces, is what I would call it when you abstract it out. When I started doing my PhD, I had this really strange feeling about engineers and biologists. Engineers had this sort of box that they thought in, and the biologists thought in another box. I felt like I was the guy who kind of plugged the sort of the interface, and I started doing research that was really at the interfaces of many things. I'll give you some examples. The first thing I started doing this was during graduate school, was taking polymers and marrying them to be inside the body for a very long time. And that required not only intricate knowledge of the chemistry of these polymers, but really understanding the body and how the body reacts to it. So that meant that I had to know the specific organ that these devices have to be in. So that involved neuroscience. So I learned a bunch of neuroscience along the way, and also a lot of chemical engineering. So understanding how to build reactors, how to scale them up, how to actually make a product that really works, and how to tailor these products and so on. And I really sort of enjoyed bringing that interface kind of a mindset to research right from graduate school, which really was funded by an MIT startup. So I had really 2 jobs at the same time, doing research in the night. So I used to go to my lab in the night and going to the company in the morning, mop the floor, do all of that, right? Really clean up the reactor and build a product and clean the pumps, really doing just everything ground up, right? So it kind of, and you know, helping build the product, marketing, sales, accounting, all of that. Just, it's a real life business school right there, right? To just learn how to do everything. Of course, I was not an expert in any of that. It's just, I was the scientist who was building a product. But really, when I brought that interface mentality, it really helped me in the research organizations at Draper, J&J, and L'Oreal, which looked to sort of create the next generation products that would, you know, morph the market in the next few decades. And the classic example was, when I came to Draper, I saw that there was a lot of people who were building microelectronic products, so MEMS, and these kind of devices that would go inside the phones and et cetera. And there were a lot of people who were building tools for drug discovery. And I said, you know what, maybe there's an interface here where we could use these MEMS kind of devices to do drug discovery to make it much more efficient than animal trials and so on and so forth. So that gave birth to the brain on a chip work, which we'll talk about next. So the same way, I was really bringing the interface sort of mentality that really gave me an edge over other people, because I sort of thought in a very different way. But what I learned was making a product and selling a product were 2 different things. I'm sure we'll go into the commercialization aspects, but really the biggest lessons that I learned on the research journey was to be really bold and think about things that other people are saying, oh, this is never going to work. If someone says it's never going to work, you should try it.
Well, that's a good lesson. But, along the same lines of being focused on that interface mindset, you did work on some really exciting projects. And one of them was at Draper, where you were the principal investigator working on the Brain on a Chip project to study brain disease, which was a program developed in collaboration with MIT and funded by DARPA. So besides the difficulty of managing such a complex program, what lessons did you learn with regards to corporate strategy and financial oversight?
This one was an incredibly satisfying program for anybody, right? First is to really try to build these devices that never existed before. So we're kind of making up the rules as we went along. Beyond the sort of complexity of the program and how to actually build this project, the biggest issue and the biggest hurdle that I faced was in trying to get pharma to buy into this idea. And I'll be very frank, even today, organs on chips are not a very well adopted technology. Even with COVID, okay, we'll talk about this, because we have this massive problem of creating new drugs really fast and B, testing those drugs really fast. When I say drugs, it could mean therapeutics, biologics, name it, right? It includes the whole gamut. I really felt that I was up against the existing norms of how life science companies are structured. Life science companies are structured with a very strong structured approach where they have lead screening, they have in vitro, and they do computational biology, and then they do ex vivo or some sort of a model organ or a model organism that they have, and they use animal trials. From the animal trials, they go scale it up to bigger animal trials, sort of larger animals, that let's say going from rabbits to pigs or rats to rabbits or something like that. And then they go from rabbits or rabbits or rodents or pigs to humans in a small clinical trial, and then they go to big human trials called pivotal or post-pivotal studies. So they're very well organized. When you start changing this whole paradigm and trying to break, the Silicon Valley term is disrupt, right? When you disrupt it or when you try to disrupt, the first thing that happens is you get disrupted first. It's the best analogy that some of my friends describe is you're the guy who kicks the door open and gets shot first. And it's an unfortunate reality, right? But it's an incredibly hard problem to solve. And what I learned was pharma is not going to change how they're going to do things. And that the time scale at which that happens is going to be in decades, not in years. So what I gathered, and I could be wrong, what I gathered was instead of making these models, what you would want to do is you wanted to become a drug discovery company. You would actually, if you wanted to take this out from the DARPA world to the commercial world, what you do is you take the model that you built and you take some lead compounds that you have, and you really start going after the actual problem. And you say, I'm going to solve the full problem end to end, a full stack, as we call it. And that insight for me, boy, it took me about 5 years to get there, to understand, because no amount of evidence I showed to pharma was good enough. You show 5 drugs that behave exactly how they behave in animals on my brain on a chip. Then they say, oh, actually you should have shown 10, or you should show something that's relevant to us, or and they're right in their own respect. So the lesson for other entrepreneurs is really think about what the true barriers are. And many times competition is not about some technology A versus B. It really is inertia.
Right. And also challenging the status quo and circumventing the standard process that has been around for years is what, we call disrupt now, but it's kind of like what Elon Musk did in the aerospace industry, where he realized that 1% of raw materials made up the cost to make a rocket, and the other 99% was just vaporware. And he's like, well, I can just figure out how to save it myself if I vertically integrate everything, like you said, and build it yourself, rather than just keep, banging your head against the wall.
That's right. I think some of the companies have realized this and actually they're doing something similar. I think Emulate could be a good example from Harvard, which came out of Don Ingber's lab, who are also our competitor in that program. And they did a great job at sort of building a company, really going full on, and even signing some partnerships with the big pharma. I mean, the jury's still out there, right? Whether this is going to still get adopted or not at a sort of a global scale, whether it's for vaccine production or for safety testing or efficacy testing, organs on chips are still in the startup world and not broken that industry barrier yet. But they're out of the universities. That's the sort of the battle's won, but you have to win the war still. Because for many deep tech entrepreneurs, this is the biggest problem, right? Going from university to outside the university itself takes about a decade. I'm just being realistic. It takes a very long time for these technologies to get adopted. And not everything is venturable, as we say. It's a tough world out there, but I think in the end, the best technologies will come out.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to that venturable world and your transition to corporate venture. So, you moved over to L'Oreal to head up their external innovation side in Boston. And over 4 years, you looked at over 200 startups, but unfortunately didn't close one venture deal. What was the biggest challenges you faced and lessons you learned while trying to invest on the corporate side?
Yeah, I think, I have to give a lot of credit to L'Oreal first. They are a massive organization. They do about 30 billion in annual revenue. That's pretty sweet. And when you do revenue like that, and they are the number one in their category, what happens is the organization is incredibly well plugged in to the outside world. And it's almost like they have pretty much very good access to most of the innovations that are coming out. The largest struggle that I had there was the model that they were using was a very close-knit model to their business units. I think this is the word strategic is a problem of the English language, unfortunately, because what strategic really mean, right? For many companies, they think what's strategic is what's strategic to their business units. Well, in my dictionary, that's not really the right way to sort of define strategic, because the word strategic has a time variable in it. And if you're really focusing so much on the business units, it's simple, right? It's a 2x2 matrix. New technology, new market, new technology, old market, old technology, new market, old technology, old market. Nobody cares about old technology, old market. Let's take that out, right? If it's a new technology, old market, then the corporate R&D should be doing that. If it's an old technology, new market, then your BD groups or a business development M&A groups should be playing in that space. Really, where corporate venture plays is in the new technology, new market. And I'll say what we've done really well at TDK Ventures. That's one of the most amazing things that we've done at TDK Ventures is that we've focused primarily on the new technology, new market space. And bringing back to the experience at L'Oreal, it was an incredibly satisfying experience for me because I learned many things about really what not to do to work with startups. Of course, things are changing and the company is doing really well. But the biggest challenge was they wanted to tie all of the external innovations, whatever they saw, whether it was an academic project or whether it was a startup project, they wanted to tie to a business unit, which is sponsored by them. And while it sounds really good from the corporate side, this is a two-way street. As you know, this is you have to work with the entrepreneur, and you almost have to feel and believe that the entrepreneur and the company have equal value to bring to each other. So I felt that was one of the biggest challenges that I faced. We closed a lot of deals on the academic side, but the venture side was really, really hard. And L'Oreal did a lot of M&As. So I helped a lot of the M&A diligence, screening, and all of that. So it was really satisfying from that point of view, because I learned how to actually think about these opportunities when you put on the M&A hat, because it's a very different filter that you put on compared to the venture side. I have to say that L'Oreal has a new venture fund called Bold. It is actually a dedicated venture fund, and they are also still requiring that business unit buy-in, but I'm sure that they will morph over time and follow some of the Intel Capitals and all the other capital firms, VC firms, CVC firms that are out there. But having said that, maybe they will certainly figure out other ways to partner with startups. Venture is not the only way to partner with startups, as many of us know. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that visualization of the four-sided matrix. It sounded like the lines got blurred a handful of times between different focuses at corporate venture funds, which we see often, and it's really frustrating as a founder or an entrepreneur, because you're misaligned, right? There's business development that needs to have buy-in, and then there's the other side of it where you want to still be an independent company building things for tons of customers rather than just focusing on this one. And sometimes the easiest question to ask a corporate venture fund when dealing with them is, are you here to buy or are you here to build, right? What is your motivation here? And if it's to buy, well, then maybe that's not the right way to start this relationship off, because some of the best corporate venture funds that I've seen out there, they acquire less than like 5% of the companies they invest in.
Five would still be big.
Yes, five would still be really big, right? And so if you're not interested in acquiring companies as your main goal, then you may be perfectly aligned with that opportunity. But if your goal is to acquire at the end of the day and you're just sucking out sort of the R&D part of it, that becomes a real misalignment of incentives for the entrepreneur.
I would say that it gets really tough to structure these deals, because what happens is now you're doing a venture deal, you are doing some side deal, and there's some other contract, and then all of these complicated things, and then you want exclusivity, and you want this, and you kind of keep adding bells and whistles to this, and just forget, you get lost in it, right? And you can never close anything, because at the end of the day, you want to invest in companies where other people will come in and invest and build the company, and potentially becomes a very successful company. And as they say, a rising tide, lifts all boats, right? So you want to be able to build that company and potentially create, the next, Google or something like that. That's what you want to do as a corporate venture fund. But if you're really trying to tether it to additional contracts, that actually, for me, is a big no-no. And at TDK Ventures, we basically have structured the fund almost like a financial fund to work with alongside with other investors and to build the company.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, let's move on to that and your role here at TDK Ventures, which recently launched a $50 million corporate venture fund for focusing on material sciences technology. So as I mentioned previously, TDK invests in early stage startups and various frontier technologies. Besides the 85 years of experience in commercializing new technologies, what excited you the most about joining a firm like TDK as an investment director last year?
Yeah, it's a great question. One thing that I saw at TDK Ventures was that TDK had been around for over 85 years. And that means they have various product lines, various business units, and the variety of markets that they were going after was just like I was like a kid in a candy store, right? Because that means the opportunity to invest in really cool things is amplified so many times. So the the very fact that we were a components company and playing in a variety of markets made me very confident that we're going to invest in the best companies. And it gave me the opportunity to broaden my horizon. That's number one. Number two was, if you knew a little bit of history of TDK, TDK was a B2C company. They used to sell cassettes. TDK has flipped so many times and pivoted so many times. TDK itself is like a startup. And, it's like a giant 120,000 people startup, because they've done so many of these pivots that their businesses, that category of the product don't exist today, right? And imagine entering a company like that with that entrepreneurial mindset. It really encouraged me. I didn't even think for a second really before taking up the job, because I knew that the people who are involved in this have, who came from the Gilded Era of the cassettes, right? and really building those technologies out, and then going from magnetic tapes to components to capacitors to ceramics to batteries to sensors to actuators. It just gave me a playhouse that I really felt that I could use my full dynamic range of my abilities of what I learned from my engineering school and my business school to apply. And the third thing that really convinced me to take up the job at TDK Ventures was my boss, Nicolas Savage, who he's kind of a, forgive me for using this word, magnetic. We're TDK, so we have to use this. But he's a really magnetic personality. When he sets up his mind, I knew this from the first time I talked to him. He makes up his mind, he will get anything done. And the most amazing part about him is he actually started thinking about TDK Ventures just 1 year before TDK Ventures was actually launched. If you talk to any CVC that is actually trying to sell the idea of a CVC, you'll realize that this usually takes about 3 to 5 years.
Wow.
And many times the idea kind of it gets socialized up to the top and it fizzles out. It goes up to the top and gets fizzled out. And the fact that Nicola was able to get it done in a year, I knew that the building blocks of the fund is structured in the right way for us to succeed very big and potentially be in the top 5 percentile of corporate VCs. And we really believe that.
Yeah, that entrepreneurial mindset is really core to TDK's history, and it still seems to be prevalent today, which is why, they're so focused on investing in frontier technologies. So let's get into that. In just 1 year at TDK Ventures, you've already looked at over 500 startups and invested in 4 of them. One of them was Autoflight X. Can you tell us about that investment and the firm's thesis behind this decision?
Yeah, we looked at the space of eVTOLs or electric vertical takeoff and landing, and we saw probably more than about 50 companies in that space. There's a lot of them out there. And one thing that we realized very quickly was the concept of air taxi or flying cars for transporting people was a really cool one, but it was not. It was a very long way out, basically. It's almost like, the best analogy I can come up with is a drug, right? It takes about $1 billion or $2 billion to get there, basically. So to get certified and all of that. So we felt that fundamentally we had to bet on a company that had a cargo business, but also had these building blocks to sort of scale that up to potentially a commercial aviation business. Not commercial aviation, really passenger business, let's say that. So that was thesis number one, which is pretty straightforward. The second unique insight that we got was we looked at the certification pathways for these eVTOLs. And what we learned was when you go beyond visual line of sight, it was really hard in the US or EASA or in Europe to commercialize these technologies. It's not impossible. Many people are getting certified now, but it just took a lot of capital to get there. So we said, okay, where is that pathway that can actually lead us to something that's commercializable within the next 2-3 years. And we landed on China. We said, okay, China is a place where the certification pathway is called SORA, or Specific Operations Risk Assessment. And basically what that means is if you are flying from point A to point B, if that path is defined, then you just have to apply that to the government, and the government gives you a permit to fly that path. And that's really good for starting a business, whether you're transporting small goods or transporting medicines, or you're transporting fire extinguishers, whatever it is that you're doing, or you're monitoring for security applications, etc. It seemed like it was a really good market to be in. So that was thesis part 2. The third part was we saw the design of all the crafts that are out there, eVTOL crafts, and we realized you get either a quadcopter, which all derived your talent from your DJI guys, right? Basically all the Chinese engineers coming from the quadcopter background, or you got the fixed wing type of design, which came from either Boeing or Airbus. So the company that's going to succeed very big, which will have not only a cargo business, but also a pathway to the commercial sort of aviation business, but also had to have talent from both sides, from China and either US or Europe, from Boeing or Airbus. So Autoflight, and when we applied this filter and we saw the 3 KPIs we saw was, we wanted to check was payload, range, and really cost. When we married these 3 things with those 3 technical parameters, we arrived at a unity set, which was Autoflight. That was the only company that had a Chinese background. It was formed by the former founder of another drone company called Unique. I don't know if you know of them. They were the only guys who gave DJI a good run for their money. They lost in the end. DJI kind of won, but Unique was really one of the most successful ones out there. So they had the entrepreneurial speed and the fearlessness of China, but they had the engineering rigor from Munich, from the talent they hired from Airbus. And that really led us to Autoflight. And they're doing incredibly well, even in the pandemic situation now. They just closed a couple of JVs with Chinese government recently, and very proud to be their seed investor. And hopefully they become really big, and we get lots of strategic value from that through next generation sensors, next generation collision avoidance, and things like that.
Wow, I love that. That's really exciting, and best of luck with this one. At TDK, you focus on next-gen transportation like Autoflight X, robotics, IoT, material sciences, and healthcare. Which of these areas are you most excited / interested in that you have yet to invest in?
I think one area, we're excited about all spaces, right? Mobility, Industry 4.0, health and wellness, all are amazing markets. Somewhat explosive, if you want to even call that, right? Because transportation is changing in a drastic way, and healthcare is changing because of AI and machine learning coming into the play, and the industries are changing because of COVID, right? Supply chains are changing, everything's changing. So we feel that all 3 are really explosive markets, and that one space that we haven't made an investment yet is in the IoT sector, and we'd love to make one or 2 investments in that space that will augment industrial productivity and things like that. We did a very deep dive on gas sensors and electronic nodes, as they call it, but we just didn't see very compelling companies out there. We saw a couple of them that were really interesting, but we would love to make an investment in that space, not just gas sensors, but generally, in IoT, industrial automation, something that we haven't made an investment in.
Yeah. Well, hopefully maybe we can find one for you to look at from the side at Ripple. That would be exciting for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So obviously we touched on this a little bit earlier on with the L'Oreal conversation, but given the significant size of TDK and the many lines of businesses the parent operates, how do you balance investing in frontier tech that may one day replace TDK products as competitors versus supporting TDK's ability to adapt and grow?
I think we did touch upon this. Look, I think the persona that we bring to the table here is we are an exploration arm. Big companies do one thing really well. They're very good at exploitation, which is when there's a mountain, let's say there's many ways to get to the top of the mountain, and some people, learn how to go faster. Some people can maneuver faster. Some people push others. Okay, it happens, and they're somewhat cannibalistic, and they go up to the top. The way we think about TDK Ventures is we're a helicopter, and we will fly to new peaks that are cloudy, and we're given that charter to go and explore these new areas. And many times we might find that these new peaks are actually valleys, or these new peaks are bigger mountains, right? So we don't know what those peaks will look like. If it takes some new technology to disrupt our existing business line, then be it. And in fact, TDK has pivoted so many times. As I mentioned before, tapes don't exist today. CDs don't exist today. Several of these products, literally entire products, don't exist. So we are very bullish on TDK's adaptability and our ability to grow, either through internal innovations or through external innovations. TDK has been very active on the M&A side, and we've acquired about 6 or 7 companies in the last 5 years, and we continue to do so. So there is certainly not a bone in our body that gets afraid of new technology. We are actually embracing that. As I mentioned before, we work very closely with our business units, but we don't require their sponsorship to make investments.
Right.
So it's deliberately, it's done by design. By design, for TDK Ventures, there are a few principles that we follow. First thing is no additional contracts. Okay, it's a pure venture deal, and it looks as vanilla as an NVCA term sheet whenever we give a term sheet. And 2 is we don't require business unit buy-in and so on, just because the time it takes for these business units to actually respond in a timely fashion is very difficult, because they've got a business to run. It's a really tough space for them, and they've got quarterly earnings to meet, et cetera. So we cannot ask them to come in and just drop everything and ask them to help us on technical due diligence, IP diligence, or whatever it is that we want to do. So by design, we are focused on executing as fast as a financial VC fund. In fact, our 7th investment and our 8th investment, from the first meeting to closure of the deal, it's taken us, for the 7th investment, 3 weeks, for the 8th investment, 5 weeks.
Wow.
So it really matches the top tier venture firms out there. If we're convinced about an area, we really want to move fast. And that's just the way we're designed. So by practice, we're trying to be like a top tier firm. When it comes to thinking about competition, all of that, we just really think about the startup first, and whether can we really add tangible value to the startup beyond capital. That's because we can't compete on capital. We're a small fund.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the mindset of being disrupted, but also being the disruptor is totally ingrained in TDK's history. They're okay being disrupted because they've had to pivot many times before, and they're okay backing the disruptors because they know that it helps them also, grow into the future where they want to be for the next 85 years.
Yeah. And if you ask our investment committee, right, Osaka-san, who sits our investment committee, he led the TDK cassette product line, and actually our CEO, they all come from the cassette world, right? And for them, they don't have an idea of what TDK cannot do. They just laugh, right? They'll simply say, we can do anything, you know? It's that entrepreneurial mindset that just, you know, makes us think the world is our, you know, is our oyster, right? And we will go out and seek those amazing innovations that will really change the world and help us in the sustainability goal that we have. So just by design, like I said, no contracts, all of that, right? And the investment committee, even our committee, how we've designed it, it's just 3 people, all in the same time zone: CTO of TDK, CFO of TDK, and CSO, Chief Strategy Officer. So, and the rule is they have to give us a decision within 24 to 48 hours of our pitch.
Wow. That really makes you feel comfortable as a venture partner or venture investor alongside you guys. I mean, you kind of answered this right now, but how do you overcome the founder's concerns of partnering with a corporate investor whose goals may be misaligned when it comes to financial returns versus strategic R&D value?
Yeah, I think corporate venture funds come in 2 flavors: CVC 1.0, CVC 2.0. We are CVC 2.0. So what I mean by that is, I think the several corporate venture funds, we will exclude Intel Capital, Qualcomm Ventures, etc., right? The ones who kind of very quickly figured out, okay, corporate venture is not about buying companies, right? GV and all of those guys, right? They've really figured that out very quickly. I'm sure they iterated as well along the way. If you talk to Human, I'm sure he'll tell you they've iterated along the way. For us, we don't invest to buy. So entrepreneurs will not have to be worried about this problem at all. We're here to add value. We really are trying to figure out how best to add value to the startup. In fact, many of the startups that actually fit our investment thesis, sometimes we say, we really don't have value to add to your startup, so we actually pass on them. So, and our entrepreneurs love it. And they say, wow, thank you, really appreciate it, because you guys are thinking about this in the right way. And to be honest, us saying that we focus on the entrepreneur is less genuine than our entrepreneurs saying that, right? So it's best to talk to our portfolio companies. And whenever founders have this concern, the first thing we do is we just tell them, hey, talk to our portfolio companies. Tell them how we behave and talk to them. And we have actually a KPI for our fund. The first KPI, actually, we have 6 KPIs. The first KPI is net promoter score from the entrepreneur. So, yeah. So we're pretty ballsy there. And if the entrepreneurs, if the company, actually, we have to get about 3 to 6 people from the company to give us positive reviews. So we literally view entrepreneur as a customer. So we cannot misbehave. We're actually in a very tight leash there. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that totally. I wish all venture funds had NPS scores. I mean, I've said to some investors too, I said, in the short term, my only clients and customers are the entrepreneurs and founders. In the long term, my LPs are my customers and founders, because the fund life is so long,
yep.
Right? But the day-to-day, you're really focusing on a lot of founders as your entrepreneurs. So I love that NPS model. So given the current environment, with COVID, how has it impacted your team's ability to invest and manage the fund? Are you able to test out these frontier technologies during this time? And have you deployed any capital without any face-to-face meetings with founders?
Yes to all. COVID, look, none of us are immune to COVID, literally, metaphorically, however you want to think about it. And we're all hit by it. When we started TDK Ventures, the first thing that came to our mind was, how do we structure the fund? And the first thing we said was, if there's an economic downturn, we're going to be severely affected by it. So let's have a separate fund. Let's have money in the bank. So we have dry powder, and we're not investing off balance sheet. So hence, it gives us a unique advantage in this marketplace today and we have access to very, very high quality deals because of this existing dry powder. And in fact, we have tripled our investing activity. In the first 9 months or so, we did about 4 deals. And in the last 3 months or so, we've done another 4 deals. So we're really tripling our rate in the COVID situation. Doesn't mean that we'll continue to do so. It just means that we are able to do deals completely remotely. The only deals that are really hard to do are the ones that you have to experience. Like we saw an interesting company that had this music, they could direct music to the listener or something like that. Really interesting company. But we're like, look, we really have to experience this product in order to, see how it works. So those are the ones that are kind of hard to do. But otherwise, we're able to test out frontier technologies by looking at the data, because for us, data speaks for itself, right? We're deploying capital. We just announced Origin last week. We're going to announce one more investment in the AI chip space next week, probably actually maybe this week. And next week, we're announcing another investment in a very cool health tech company making very, very interesting products in the point of care diagnostic space. So we're deploying capital. I think the only thing that's changed is our bar for really strong teams has just gotten higher. We really want an amazing team. We used to look for very good teams, but now we really look for amazing teams. And the bar for top-tier co-investors has also increased, because we want to make sure that our co-investors have enough dry powder and enough capital allocated to support the company in these hard times. So if the runway is a little low, they should be able to come in and put in $1 million or $2 million or whatever it is that's needed for the entrepreneurs to survive the storm and really execute on the plans despite the delays. So hence our metrics have gone bars have gone really slightly higher on the team evaluation side, on the co-investor evaluation side, but really nothing else has changed that much.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it sounds like you guys are increasing your speed of velocity for investing during this time. And also that point about leveling up, like the bar for team members and sort of the entrepreneurs themselves. I agree with you completely. I think, for the last decade, everyone was an entrepreneur, everyone was getting funded. It was pretty easy. Money was sloshing around. But I think now in the face of COVID and sort of this potential economic downturn, people are really saying the true entrepreneurs are going to shine through for the next decade. And those are the ones that you want to be funding right now, which makes total sense. So onto my favorite part, which are the book recommendations. And you have some really exciting, interesting ones here. So can you tell us about these books that you recommend for our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. The Great Feuds in Mathematics is probably my favorite because when I was in grad school, I wanted to learn about mathematicians because they seemed like really amazing people. So I had this persona that a mathematician is an absolute genius and they are really, really the cream of the crop and such. And what I learned was that, yes, they are the cream of the crop, but they're still humans. And the Great Feuds in Mathematics really shines light upon how human some of the greatest people were. And in fact, they were also plagued with jealousy. They were plagued with all these issues that we all have as human beings. And it really humanized the most ultimate form of science for me. So that's about the Great Feuds. I really recommend people to read it to get a glimpse into the minds of the geniuses, the so-called geniuses, and yet human people. The Big Bang, that one was also during my grad school. I read this. I felt a dire need to understand the order in the universe. It just felt to me, as a scientist, I have to understand. Yeah, I have to know my field, but I have to understand how the universe is structured and how it began and such. And what is the real evidence for many of these things? And Simon Singh really put a very beautiful picture of the beginning of this universe, right from day zero, as he calls it, and gave me a very good glimpse of the physics that's known and physics that's unknown, because there's always going to be things that are unknown, and that really helped me just develop as a person and to appreciate different forms of sciences. And I don't think I need to say much about brief history of time. I'll pass on that. The science of everything, the last one, it was actually a gift from my father-in-law. What I realized was many people don't know how the world works, just practically, right? How does a microwave work? How does your cell phone work? How does the internet work? It's just simply, I felt that, when I talked to my dad, even he doesn't know many of the things. He's a science teacher. And it really made me feel that I should learn about the day-to-day things. And it gave me a bit of common sense. And I have a 10-month-old now, and I think it's going to be amazing for him to learn about, the science of everything. Because ultimately, I believe everything is about science. It's literally everything. We're talking because of science, right? Zoom wouldn't have existed if radio waves weren't discovered. So I would feel that if you don't know science, it would be a colossal loss for humanity. And I'll close with Elon Musk's quote, right? If we feel that technology will automatically improve over time, that's wrong. It's not going to improve over time. We have to work hard on it. We have to learn and work hard because Egyptians built the Great Pyramids. What happened? It didn't get better over time. We sent a man to the moon in 1969. What happened? It didn't get better over time. It got worse, right? So learning about how things work is a building block for everybody. And it just makes us much smarter and better as investors, as people, and as parents, etc.
I love that. I love these book suggestions. And I can't wait to hear what kind of nighttime stories you're telling your 10-month-old from the science of everything view.
Oh, actually, I've got these books from this guy. I can't remember his name. Quantum Mechanics for Babies is one book I have. I've got, no, seriously. It's just crazy. I mean, these books are so good. I've got Statistical Physics for Babies. I've got General Relativity for Babies. I read them to my son, Akash, every night.
That's amazing.
I read 2 books a night.
That's incredible. Yep. Well, before we wrap things up, I always ask our guests for any final words of inspiration for our audience.
Well, I would say this is a quote not from me. It's from Azim Premji, one of the premier entrepreneurs from India, founders of Wipro, if you know the company. Azim Premji says something of this order. He says, if you have a goal that's not laughable, don't have it. You should have a goal that really, really people should laugh about it. And I think if you didn't have those goals, there's no point in just doing incremental stuff and just, saying, oh, this is good enough, etc.
That's awesome. Go big or go home. Thank you so much for joining us today in the Tank, Anil. It was really great to hear your journey from research and strategy and development all the way through corporate venture. And I wish you the best of success with TDK. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Matt. Have a good one.